Hey everyone, thank you for joining me back in the Emzone, or welcome if you are new here. My name is Em, I'm your podcast host, and I'm very grateful to have you joining me today with my guest, JT. JT and I are going to be talking about risk taking, which is something that I've had to become a little bit more comfortable with my different roles in football over the years, and just become more familiar with what risk taking looks like and why it's important in all assets and all facets of life. So JT, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Em, for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
I love all of our conversations because anytime we chat, whether it's in a podcast or just one of our phone calls, I'm always very empowered and inspired afterwards, and it just makes my day. So thank you for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you share that. I just posted today this idea that to live a rich and fulfilling life, you must first enrich the lives of others, right? And I feel like that's a gift that we all have. So I love the fact that you leave our conversations feeling enriched, and I know it's mutual.
Awesome. So we will get right into it. So we talked a little bit about what we wanted this conversation to look like, what it might lead to, and we settled on the idea of risk taking. So I think it's important to get your perspective on risk taking because it's probably different than mine. So I'm curious as to what you consider to be risk taking, or maybe an example of a risk that you've taken, maybe what the outcome is.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Em. And first, I think it's important that we acknowledge that we are programmed and we are conditioned and we are led to believe that success is achieved by doing what's safe and comfortable. So I think it's first coming to that understanding. But then it's also understanding that in that moment, that safety and comfort actually can keep us feeling stuck at times. So for me, risk taking is this idea of going all in. It's choosing to embrace the discomfort of growth. It is embracing this imperfection of life and just really leaning into it. So that to me is what risk taking is about. It's doing that on a consistent basis. And from that ability to do that, to embrace risk taking, that's where all the blessings of life happen. More job opportunities, more financial abundance, richer relationships. So that's my idea of risk taking and why it's important to do it on a daily basis.
Yeah, I agree. And I definitely know with our conversations, you're always about like going all in, and just like your conversation with Travis is making those like quick and fast decisions, which I'm not as skilled at. I'm very calculated when I'm making decisions. I always like weigh out the pros and cons and think about like every possible outcome. So when we talk about taking risks, I don't feel like I take risks as much as I just sort of like take opportunities, because it's not like I feel like I'm risking like I'm going to lose anything. It's almost like you've said it before, it's just like throwing your hat in the ring. So like the worst thing, if I apply to a position and I don't get it, I'm in like the same spot I am now. Whereas I don't think I'm as bold in my risk taking as like leaving my job and just going all in for something that I love to do. I'm much more like calculated, I think, a little bit.
Well, it's interesting that you share that. And one, this is risk taking. You actually a willingness to look at your past experiences, right? To say, hey, these are the areas I'm great in. These are the areas I need to work on. So right there, that's risk taking, because the truth is it would be far easier to just be that proverbial ostrich with your head in the sand and just continue to do what's safe and comfortable. And it's understanding that those actions, right, whether it was you throwing your hat in the ring to become a district football coordinator, to you going all in and being the U18 women's GM, to you wanting to become this programs manager at Football Ontario, that's all risk taking, and it's all leading you to great places. So I guess I would just encourage you that and celebrate the fact you are taking risks. Your journey is unique to you, and it's always going to lead you to more beautiful places.
Yeah. I think after this weekend too, in our women's football conference, I feel like even more now, like going all in on this and having conversations with like family, loved ones, my support system, they see it more as taking a risk, because it's almost like it's not like a secure and stable job necessarily being in football. So even after the success of this past weekend, they're like, well, don't quit your day job. Like, this is just kind of a passion. But I think if something comes out of it and I do become full-time working in football and, you know, doing a couple different things that like truly make me happy and that I'm passionate about and still obviously pay me to support my lifestyle, like that, I think would be the ultimate risk, because it would be completely different than, you know, what I thought my career path would be. Like obviously going to teachers college and like preparing on that path for a long time, and then just completely switching and doing something different than teaching, I think. So that would be like the ultimate risk if I got there.
Well, it's interesting. You brought up an interesting idea, right? Because again, this weekend, depending when your listeners are tuning into this, it was an amazing celebration of women and girls football in this, not only in your lives and Taylor's lives in, you know, Football Ontario, or even I would say nationally, you know, worldwide, like a women's only football conference. Like, think of how cool that is. And I remember when I was having this conversation with our executive director of Football Ontario, Aaron Giesler, and he was saying the fact that if you think about it, a year ago, 2 years ago, some of these strong and powerful women weren't even in these roles yet. Like, it was like sort of like a pipe dream. And here we are now, where we're having, you know, and you helped to create this first event ever. And again, if you hadn't have gone all in on your dream, maybe some of those that are a little behind you on their journey, maybe they wouldn't be going all in. So I guess why I share this with you is just this idea is when you are willing to take a risk, when you're willing to lean into the discomfort of growth, when you're willing to embrace this imperfection of life, that you give others permission to do the same. And you are helping to pave the way for other strong and powerful women and girls that want to do the same.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. And again, the success of the conference, I guess, in the beginning, it could have been seen as a risk because it never been done before. Like, Taylor and I are not professional event planners. Like, we were just kind of, we had a vision of what we wanted that event to look like, but the reward of it and seeing the turnout, people coming from Quebec, Alberta, Saskatchewan, like, we never thought that would be the case. But in the beginning, like when our tickets first went on sale and they weren't selling super quick, it was kind of like, okay, well, we've already put a lot of time and effort into this. Like, it was a risk, not knowing what, you know, the turnout would be or what that feedback would be like. But then I think it's almost that thing of like risk versus reward. It's like, okay, maybe going into this, it might not turn out, but then looking back at the reward and all of the people that came and, you know, their positive experiences and being able to network with people across the country and other women and girls, I think like that was huge. And I am obviously super grateful that we took that risk of putting on this event.
Absolutely. And here's a question that sort of came up for me as you were sharing, right? Like, this past weekend was a byproduct of a lot of focus, reps, and sets, right? There was a lot of behind the scenes work that even got you to this point. So I'm curious, from your perspective, as you look back from what you know now, what kept you going during those times where, you know, like you said, initially, maybe tickets weren't being sold as quickly, right? Or maybe there's other adversity, challenges, or obstacles that came up. I'm curious, like, what kept you inspired to take focused action towards your goals?
Yeah, I think I've talked about it a few times. Like, I talked about it at my presentation I did at the conference, and like the purpose of my podcast, it's to provide opportunities to women and girls that maybe they didn't know existed. So we had some of our Team Ontario women's tackle players come. We had some of the Team Alberta tackle players come who are still, you know, teenagers and maybe looking for that next opportunity or how they can stay involved. So I think at the end of the day, like that's why I want to do all of this, is to show them that, you know, you can continue being a player in some of our senior women's leagues. You can take on a coaching role, officiating, program management, like anything is really possible, as like cliche as that is. But again, just to show them that those opportunities are out there. And I knew, you know, whether we had 20 people come or 100 people come, like they would get something out of it. And I think that's what sort of motivated me and kept me going to pursue that conference.
So it sounds like for you, the ability to take those focused action, to embrace risk taking, was based on, like, you identified something bigger than you, right? And for you, it sounded like it was about providing opportunities to future strong and powerful women and girls that want to come into this space.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that that's important where we look at risk taking, right? And we often talk about like, what's, you know, it's interesting. It's so cliche, right? Like, what's my purpose? You know, and it's this idea of, you know, identifying a mission that's greater than you. Yeah. And anyone that's ever played sports understands that. Like, you will push yourself. Like, we all have our own version of what's safe and comfortable. Like, my version of safe and comfortable is different than yours, different than each of your listeners. But when you identify a bigger why, a mission, that's what inspires you to take, you know, risk when everything is saying, go back to what's safe and comfortable, go back to what's safe and familiar. So I think I think you got a, you know, an MBA in the ability of having a bigger why, a big mission. And that's what allows you to sort of navigate the uncomfortable process of risk taking.
Yeah. Do you think, so you're really good at giving people advice or encouraging them to take risks, especially if you can see that it's something they're passionate about and it does, you know, serve their purpose. Mm-hmm. Have you always been that way? Like, do you think you've always been able to take risks or take your own advice?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say from my experience growing up, I was someone that I always gravitated to people that acknowledged, that praised, that celebrated me. And you know, I grew up, I spent a lot of time as a child. Again, my parents were immigrants. They came to this country with very little, and they, you know, we were blessed and they provided a beautiful life for my brother and I. But I also understand coming to a new country where you don't know people, you're starting a life. I mean, yeah, they've done a great job of putting my brother and I further along than what they had. But again, that also required them to, you know, really go all in on their professional careers. Yeah. So I think that sort of left me to a little bit of like, figure it out myself, learning how to be very independent. So I think I always naturally gravitated to sort of people, teachers, coaches, mentors that really poured their time and energy into me. So I felt, for me, when I eventually found education, I didn't always feel very seen, very heard, you know, appreciated growing up. And again, it just is like just observing it. So I think for me, I really made it my mission that when I became a high school educator, a coach, that I wanted everyone to at least feel seen, feel heard, feel appreciated. Like I've always taken interest in like what makes you tick? Like, what's on your heart? Like, tell me what drives you, what energizes you, what makes you feel enthused. Like, I think that that's something that's, I don't know, I just want to be the person that I wanted when I was growing up. So I would say that, yes, I have put a lot of reps and sets in doing that. But I also acknowledge the fact near the end of my teaching career, I, to a degree, started unconsciously doing what was safe and comfortable. I stuck in teaching because it was safe and comfortable. It was a guarantee. I was good at it. There was a 6-figure paycheck, summers off, right? And it just, I was doing that. And the interesting part is as I started to not always practice what I preach about going all in and going for your dreams, I noticed there's some misalignment in my life. And I find whenever you're sort of misaligned, when your words and actions aren't aligned, that can take you to some uncomfortable places, right? Because you're out of alignment, right? You're not really practicing what you preach. And for me, again, there are a lot of challenges, right? Like some struggles, health and wellness. And it finally got me to the point to where it was like, okay, like how many times do you have to get knocked down? Like something has to change. So I feel like for the most part, yes, I've always been someone who embraces, growth and risk taking. I sort of lost my way a little bit near the end of my teaching career, but I found that leaving teaching actually allowed me to get back on the path. And I have found that as I've done it more and more with the risk taking, it's actually led to a more rich and fulfilling life in all areas, right? Professionally, most importantly, like in my relationships in my family, right? In my marriage, with my kids, more importantly, myself. So yeah, like anyone, it's been a journey filled with ebbs and flows.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. There were a couple of things that came up that I definitely resonated with. So before I forget, I'm going to ask another question kind of on top of that. And it has to do with the education piece, because again, you and I are both former educators, realized that it wasn't the right path and took that risk of doing something else. And again, if anyone's listening who's in education or like any role that you've been in for a long time that you maybe like went to school for and then just did that and you've stuck with it, what do you think was maybe the moment that you knew it was time for a change? So I know you talked about like that misalignment with what you were saying and what you were practicing. Was there a few things that happened that you just like knew it was time for a change?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? And it's a great reminder for me to just like to remind myself and to remind others listening to this, watching this, that you are doing the best you can based on your current level of awareness. So it's understanding that like you're exactly where you're supposed to be right now. And for me, what that reminds me is there's these little like nudges, right? Like I think back to like in 2016 when I made the decision to apply to a new school, to my quote unquote dream school, and end up in hospital the day before. That was a nudge sort of saying, make a change or we're going to force you to make a change. Right. So I think it forced me to go to those uncomfortable places. In hindsight, when I look at my last year of coaching high school football, 2018, one of the goals was always to win that public league championship. And I talked to a good friend who I also taught and coached with. And he actually said to me that you could tell that there was this part of you that kind of not shut down, but your priorities shifted. So once we had accomplished our collective goal for the program, he said something inside of you, like you could shift. You realize that you were still doing your best, but you could tell your focus started going elsewhere. So that was always something that resonated with me. Again, my last year in preparation to our football banquet, I actually took a week of leave prior to the banquet. There was like something where I'm like, I don't feel like getting out of bed. And I took a week personal leave right before the banquet. So I actually did not physically attend my last football banquet. But I felt like there's something that just didn't fit. Fast forward the last 6 months of my teaching career, I hustled, I grinded my way through that. I got up every day. And I remember thinking very often, many days, like, I just want to stay in bed. But I also knew, being a high quality athlete and coach, that people were relying on me to be there. So, during track season, I need to get there because my good friend needs me to be there to coach after school. Like I'm not willing to leave it behind training. And then it became, okay, we have a strong senior girls team that's going to make it to OFSA this year. You need to get your butt up to work and be there for them. And most days I could will myself right? That's one of the beauties of being a high quality athlete and coach. Like, we'll get up and do the work. But the interesting part are there were some days where I would get a minute from work and I would just turn around and call in sick, right? Because it physically was making me feel ill, the idea of going in to another to teach. It wasn't anything to do with my colleagues, it wasn't anything to do with the students or the student athletes I was working with. It was more about me. So I think what really sort of came to head was off the track. It's in Guelph. We have this amazing day where we have the senior girls team that, you know, performs like beautifully. Like, they have this amazing experience. And as soon as they were done, I go back to my hotel room and pack up my stuff. I go home. I get home and I remember physically being unable to get out of bed. So it was one of those things where I had two former colleagues and good friends who said, okay, you're done. Like, they literally had to come over and tell me, it's okay, we got you. You know, like, and that's, again, they're both high quality athletes. So they understood that. So it almost forced me to have two strong and powerful people in my life to say, we got you. Like, it's okay. To give me permission that was okay. And from there, I think it made me realize that I need to do what's best for myself and my family and stop putting the needs of other people ahead, because if I continue, you know, where's that going to lead? So that was like these, you know, these nudges along the way that really helped me to understand that the universe, God, source, whatever you believe in, is always giving you signs. You just gotta ask yourself, am I open to actually seeing them?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. You had quite a few moments that were clear signs that there was something else you could be doing, something else that would fulfill you. And I think, again, we're similar in the sense that, like, if I like take a risk on something, whether it's like a career opportunity, like in the past, I would feel like I can't do, like, selfishly, I can't do that. Like, what would that mean for like my relationship or my friends or my family, or would I be letting people down, like my colleagues? But, and you mentioned that as well. Like, it came to a point where you said, you know, I need to recognize, like, for myself, for my family, like, this is something that I need to do. And it, you know, people aren't going to see it as selfish. Like, if it's what's best for you at the end of the day, you need to like go for it and go all in.
Yeah, no, and you bring up a great point, right? Like, this idea of like, what truly matters to me. And I believe that's a powerful question, right? Because again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's not good or bad, but what truly matters to me. And for me, it was the health and wellness piece. Like, I needed to get my house in order, you know, my spiritual, my mental, you know, my physical, my emotional health in order before I could go out and do anything. And it really helped me to understand when I talked to a former student athlete who was going into his 5th year. So I was, you know, I chose to walk away from 12 returning grade 12s. Like, this was their year. So that in itself posed a lot of like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm letting them down. And it was interesting that I had a conversation with one of them who's still playing sport at a high level today. And, you know, is probably going to go on to play professional. And he said, you know what, coach, I'm glad that you decided to put you and your family first, because if you didn't, I think we would have all been left wondering, like, why, what's different about coach? Why isn't he able to give us the same way? So I remember having this conversation. Here's some 20-year-old student athlete that is telling me, like, coach, I get it. I understand why you left. You needed to put you and your family first. I think that just reminded me that you're always making people feel something, whether we're aware of it or not. And if people generally care about you, they're going to, you know, they'll understand it the way. They might not get it right away, but they will see the big picture, right? Eventually.
Yeah. It's interesting too that people can recognize that. So they were able to tell, like, maybe in your last year there, you weren't fully yourself, like you weren't all in, you weren't fully happy. So then again, even though it might have at some point seemed like to you, it might be selfish, like leaving those athletes, for them to come back and reassure you and say, like, no, we understand why you did it. That just shows that you're very like open and like vulnerable maybe with how you're feeling, but that
Mhm.
people support you and know that you're going to make the right decision for yourself.
Yeah. And I'll sort of sum it up here. It's been interesting walking this journey since I left in 2019. So you look at it, 3.5 years approaching 4. And I run into students that I taught 2, 3 years ago, or sorry, probably closer to 4 or 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And one of the comments they make, I even talked to a Team Ontario athlete. He saw a picture of a school I used to teach at. He's like, Coach, you smile a lot more now. And it's been interesting that they've very often, like people, again, who have known me a year, people who have known me 5, 10, 15 years say, you just seem so much happier. And I thought like, I feel like I created a lot of success in education, right? I did, enrich a lot of lives, but even people start to realize like the energy I'm coming with, the enthusiasm that I'm approaching life, much different. He sent me a picture and I'm like, oh my goodness, who is that person? Like I had this stoic look on my face, like just all serious. So I don't know,
I think
just interesting.
I was going to say, it's interesting too, what we're doing now with Football Ontario. And I think you had this conversation with Coach Cruz a few weeks ago that even though you're not in the classroom, which is typically what we think of in terms of education, like you're still having an impact on young people with your high performance fundamental sessions. And every time we go out to an ID camp and you interact with them, or if you support them at a tournament, like you're still a role model and a leader for them. And I think you're able to take that background in education and just apply those skills in a different setting. So you're still, doing what you love in terms of, supporting people and helping them to achieve greatness.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate you recognizing that, Em. And as you were sharing that, it just reminded me that it's easy at times to get stuck. It has to be this way. Like, oh, okay, I love working with young people. Well, I have to be a teacher. Where when you become open to how, right? Like there are lots of different hows to do this, right? Like I still feel like I'm still teaching and working with young people today. It's just the vehicle's changed, and that's okay. So I find like being open to the how, and that's something I've had to learn, which hasn't been the easiest journey for me, is where opportunities in life and is something that is required if you truly want to take a risk and go all in on something.
Yeah. I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
And again, it's kind of about timing. So you've talked about for your journey and your experience with risk taking, there's been signs for you and there's been support from like friends and family. What advice would you give to someone if they are looking to take a risk, but maybe don't have that same level of support, or there aren't necessarily signs for them? What would you suggest?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, I think back to a great coach I had once that said this idea that your first responsibility in life is to get clear with what you want. How it happens is none of your concern. So again, I would encourage everyone to ask, like, what is it that truly matters to me? And play with that. And if it's something that you're not sure right now, that's okay. But keep playing with that, right? And then as you get some clarity around that, we can start to look at like, why is that important to me? So again, is that power of questions, right? So like, what is it that you want? Why is it important to you? And what I would just encourage everyone, and again, this is a practice that I challenge myself to do every day. It comes back to this idea of trust. And it's just understanding that trust that everything you require is going to show up exactly as you need it. No sooner, no later. And I'll give everyone an analogy, a simple analogy. If you and I are standing shoulder to shoulder in a dark room and the lights are completely turned off, you can do one of two things. The easy thing to do is just stand in the dark and go, I should move. I shouldn't move. I should move. I shouldn't move. And we all play that game, right? The should I or shouldn't I game, which, by the way, folks, if you ever find yourself playing it, stop it. Stop shitting on yourself. So that's the first thing. 2, take one focus step forward. And as you take a focus step forward, more of the room is going to begin to open up to you. You're going to become aware of what's around you. So it just take a focused action today. And by doing that, something good's gonna happen from it. So that's words of wisdom that I would share.
I love that. Thank you. Very good words of wisdom. I think that can sometimes be the hardest part too, is just taking that first step. But I think if you're able to think of it in terms of like, it doesn't have to be like a huge step or like a be all end all. It could be something as like a few months ago when I was thinking about starting a podcast, I did like a recording on my phone of what I would talk about. And then it gave me clarity of like, is this something I want to continue doing? And that was it. Like, it didn't have to be published. It didn't have to be like a huge step, but it's just, like you said, taking that small focused action, and then you get more clarity. Either it's, you know, something you want to continue with, or maybe like, okay, this isn't for me, I'll think of something else.
Yeah. And it's interesting you said that, right? It goes back to what you said of why the conversation with Travis resonated with you, right? What was the topic of that conversation? Do you remember?
Decision making.
Right? You had to make the decision to actually record a podcast first. And from there has sprung the first episode of Emzone. It's sprung the conversation with Taylor. It's springing this conversation now, right? So it always leads to beautiful places.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did you have anything else you want to add about risk taking?
No, just as Nike says, just do it.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Just go all in. That's my favorite quote from you in Football Ontario. It's the best. Awesome. Well, JT, thank you for joining us in the Emzone this week. I will put your information in the description for the episode if anyone wants to connect with you on social media and ask for some advice or some more words of wisdom. And that has been episode 3 of the Emzone. You can now head back to the sidelines.